Welcome to episode 3 of Build Back Better, an interview series designed to help education leaders to shape, refine, improve, and contextualize the support they're providing to vulnerable populations in Thailand and Myanmar in the wake of COVID-19. My name is Greg Teresfudis, and today I'm joined by Dr. Kirk Person, the Senior Consultant for Literacy and Education at SIL International. For the last 2 decades, Kirk has led policy-level platforms on the inclusion of minority languages, most recently facilitating the development of the Bangkok Statement on Language and Inclusion, which brought together education ministers from 16 countries. Kirk is a champion for the promotion of multilingual education and is fluent in 4 languages himself, notably the Northern Thai Bisu language, spoken by fewer than 1,000 people. Kirk, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you to Teacher Focus for this opportunity.
Great. Last time we saw each other was the Asia Pacific Multilingual Education Working Group. It seems like forever ago. Wow, things changed. Kirk, I'm going to ask you a couple questions today because I know you've worked so closely with minority, ethnic, and language groups. I feel like you have such a passion, and you're thinking about how they can be included, what special considerations are needed for them. And so today I want to ask you a couple of questions that hopefully will help education leaders to really think through how to include some of those students at their schools, in their communities, that need a little bit of extra attention, a little bit of extra support in order to access the resources that other children have access to. So my first question for you is, what educational considerations are needed for the inclusion of minority ethno-linguistic groups, especially during this challenging time?
Yeah, well, I think in any time of challenge or emergency, governments and teachers and others want to do something, but sometimes those what we call emergency education or education in emergency situations tends to go to a one-size-fits-all type of model. Like, okay, we need to give some books to the children, so let's give all the kids this book, and they can work through that with their parents and they'll be fine. But I think especially for migrant children and minority children, the one-size-fits-all mindset can be problematic, whether it's giving all the children the same book or let's all have a satellite broadcast and keep all the children going on that. So as I talk to many people about, education in emergency situations and ask about programs, the one thing that people don't seem to think about is language and culture. This is when I talk to international donors, and they'll talk about a large emergency program they're putting into effect. And I ask, well, what language will that be in? And I actually had one major donor said, I don't know, I never thought to ask. Maybe English, because English is important. And I think when people do that, they miss the incredible opportunities from connecting more deeply with the ethnic minority communities. I think having a sort of a localized mindset of saying, hey, this is an opportunity to build on the traditional knowledge that the parents and grandparents have. In times of crisis, we look to our families. And I think one message we need to convey to parents and grandparents is your knowledge is important for your children's education.
Absolutely.
So continue talking to the children in your mother tongue. Things like telling stories. If you have more time with your children than you did when they were at schools, spend time telling them stories every day. Or even as you go through the day, talking about the things you're doing. Like if you are sweeping the floor together, talk about that, like saying, let's sweep the floor. What are we sweeping? Yes, dust. So much dust. Oh, there's a dead bug. Should we sweep the bug too? Oh, sweep the dust and the bug. And a candy wrapper. Ooh, is it good for us to eat too much candy? Maybe not, but let's sweep that away. Just little things of narrating your daily life to help especially small children continue developing mentally. Talk about the memories of the culture. The grandparents and have often lived through many crisis times before. They can talk about difficult things that they went through and how they solved problems, or how they would do things differently the second time. Talk about how, you know, our culture helps prepare us for emergencies, because our culture teaches the importance of working with our neighbors, of sacrifice to help others. And even talk about school. Talk about what life was like in the school for the children, and what would an ideal school be like. Maybe plant some dreams about that type of thing. So I think that part of my message, at least, would be localization. Remember your culture, your language, and how that can be a good educational tool.
I love that response. I feel like there's kind of a wake-up call happening among governments, among education systems, realizing how much weight is on parents' shoulders during the regular school year, but especially now, right, where parents are being called into roles to educate their kids. At my house behind, we have kind of a chain link back fence, and we can see right into our neighbor's yard. And he was making a wicker broom from scratch. And I remember looking out the window and just seeing all the kids watching, and, you know, looking at Grandpa making this broom. And it's great. It's a lesson, and for me, it's just amazing to see, you know, the incredible amount of detail needed to produce something like that. And you know, parents play this pivotal role, and even the mundane, like you said, sweeping, household chores. These can be opportunities to teach and learn, and I feel like the more we can support parents and give them that encouragement, the better. They're the ones taking care of children in emergencies right now, so let's empower them.
Yeah, and I think, well, that making a broom is such a great example, because, you know, one of the things, especially with younger people, younger children, that teachers do is try to develop their finger coordination, their ability to hold a pencil, to write, to make those small things. And so you know, putting a broom together is what we call fine motor skills development. And also, I suspect there could be some counting involved in how many you know, how many strands of straw or whatever is in the broom. Maybe you bundle 5 at a time and then put a thread through, or something like that. So there's motor development, there's counting, a little bit of math. There's just feeling that you're successful at something, because in emergencies, you know, there's a need of humans to feel we can accomplish something. So at least you can make this, you can produce this. There's the feeling that you get from working with your grandfather. Being taught something by an older person can be a very beneficial thing for a child. But like you said, something you mentioned a minute ago made me think too, when the schools do reopen, just for the schools to remember that minority and migrant communities do have these resources. And we don't need parents to see the school as the place where children go to be educated. And we don't need the schools to feel that the parents don't know much because they're migrants, they didn't go to university or whatever. But as the schools reopen, just to try to have that closer community connection, so that both the schools recognize the resources of the community, and the community feels proud of those resources and feels that the school values those resources.
Absolutely. And that kind of lends well to my second question. Kind of from your experience, I know you've been involved and led a lot of programs promoting equality at schools. Do you have any solutions that you can share with us that have worked to promote equality for students from diverse ethno-linguistic or minority backgrounds?
Yeah, well, Um, Even the word equality is interesting. I prefer to use the word equity. I remember many years ago, I heard on a Thai television program, they were talking about how all of these minority students had equal opportunity because they had the same book as the children in Bangkok. And the teachers had been trained in universities and had the same qualification as a teacher in Bangkok. But to me, that really wasn't equality, because that teacher and that book might not be able to help the student as well as something that was developed locally.
Right.
And that built on the student's knowledge of his or her language or his or her culture. So I think to improve equity, again, starting with the things that the child knows is very important, sort of like the Bloom's taxonomy a little bit, beginning with the things they know to help them learn the things that are a little bit further away. You know, I think the school can sort of set the tone or sort of set environment where the different languages and cultures are valued. Some schools, it might be all minority children from one group. Some it might be 2 or 3 different groups. But regardless, I think that the schools can do a lot to promote that sense of value. But also as much as possible, including the local language and culture, because that will give the children tools to do better in the long run.
Absolutely. I feel here on the border that language makes or breaks education for so many children. And there are a few Thai schools that offer Burmese language classes and have opportunities for the children to learn their mother tongue language, either in school or after school. And I would say one of the main advantages of a lot of the migrant learning centers are that the students are learning in their mother tongue language, or they're actually learning 2 languages that they would use at home. So one example would be Sagal Karen and Burmese, and some Sagal Karen, Burmese, and Thai. So I feel like languages are a passport here in a sense. They provide so much opportunity, and the more that we can integrate them and make them available to kids at school, I mean, it's just only going to be good things for those kids.
Yeah, and I think that's so important too for the schools to have the perspective of what they can do to help the majority of the kids. Like often in Thai schools, I hear stories of, oh, here's a migrant child from Burma, and he is now in grade 6, and he speaks better Thai than all the Thai students. And so this one boy or girl might be shown as the great example. But then you have to ask, well, so you have one good example. What about, you know, are there more children, or what are they happening? And often you find out that, well, lots of them dropped out.
Yeah.
So while the school was boasting that they had a good program because of the one child, well, what about the 20 or 30 others that didn't make it? And, you know, I think even with language, you know, maybe 10 or 20% of people are naturally gifted and will learn easily wherever they are. But then you have to think again, what about the 80%? What will help them? And we know that a lot of mother tongue emphasis, like you said, will help them, especially in the early reading. It's very hard to learn to read a language that you don't really speak yet. Yet that's the situation many migrant and minority children are put into. And it's very hard to learn to speak a language from learning the alphabet. Right. So in many schools, there's the emphasis, learn the English alphabet or the Thai alphabet. But it really doesn't mean much to the children because they don't maybe know what an apple is yet, or they don't know that what the word for chicken is. I've had several teachers and Thai administrators along the border complain that they say the children are able to read very well in Thai, but they don't know what they're reading. So they can read the word nok, but they won't know that it means bird. Right. And some teachers are just happy that the kids are able to read, and the meaning, they don't seem to realize how important the meaning is, or they hope that maybe they'll learn the meaning later. But if that's reversed, if the child knows the meaning first and then learns the letters and the sounds, it makes it a lot easier to learn how to read.
Yeah, the analogy that comes to my mind is that submersion approach, right? So I didn't learn to swim by being kicked in the deep end. The children don't learn languages by just being thrown into a class where they understand zero at the very beginning, right? It's there are strategies, there are techniques, and there's a process that really does work. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. And then too, in that situation, like children learn so much language from their friends also.
Right.
So like, if maybe a migrant child is in a classroom where everyone else is Thai, they might not have as many problems. But if most of the children are migrant children and the teacher is the only one speaking Thai, it will take a lot longer for those children to learn Thai.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that is a great segue to the last question, which you mentioned contextualizing before, and I wonder for the school leaders, for the teachers who are listening, could you share some examples of an intervention that was contextualized to ensure that those most at-risk children are included?
I really wish I could. I can't. There are no great examples that have come to mind. I've been thinking about this for a few days. But what that question makes me want to do is learn more from people like you or other people connected with Teacher Focus or even migrant parents of situations where that really was done very well.
We're working on a series to help teachers right now, and connecting the Myanmar curriculum to the COVID situation, because we felt that there's a lot of good springboards that one of the lessons I'm thinking of is citizenship, and asking questions like what does a good citizen do? How does a good citizen act? How do they treat others? And working to adapt that and contextualize that to this situation to say, okay, so what does a good citizen do now in this time of restriction, right? Oh, they wear a mask. They help their friends. They wash their hands and are conscientious of others. And I think that contextualizing makes such a big difference, and it makes it more real. I mean, you mentioned at the start of our interview just how it brings it to life. It brings it home, and I think kids are more likely to use it, more likely to remember it, and apply it. If it's done in the classroom. And I think it takes very conscientious teaching. It takes some creativity, and it takes that willingness to embrace other cultures, right? You mentioned before maybe about highlighting where assimilation is great. This one student was able to jump through all the hoops, but what about the other? How can we lift up and respect the diversity, and especially catch the students who aren't able to jump through all the hoops?
Right. And even I think a message for that in governments is, I remember many years ago, the head of SIMEO, the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education organization. He is a Filipino gentleman, and he had previously been Secretary of Education or Minister of Education for the Philippines. And he said, basically governments have to know they're going to have to pay somewhere. You either pay and invest in helping children, and especially in the early years through education, or you're going to pay later with social problems, with increased health problems, and other things. So, it's very hard for any of us to take a long-term view. Another friend contrasted it to a rice farmer versus a teak tree farmer. The rice farmer wants to see results in a few months. The teak tree farmer knows that it's going to take 15 years before he can sell the wood from his trees. So he's willing to invest that. And I think with kids, we need to remember we have a good long time with them, hopefully. If we can keep them in the school, keep them engaged, and that later that the child will be stronger and our whole society will be better off for having more educated, committed citizens, like you said.
Kirk, I think that's a great point to leave this interview with. I think right now there is a lot of kind of focusing on the here and the now, and you know, all the little changes and pivots we need to make now. But I think it's really great to leave this interview with the thought that, you know, this education hopefully is a 15, 16-year lifelong process that that we need to stay committed to, looking at that, playing the long game. So thank you so much for joining me today, and look forward to seeing you again.
Okay.
Hopefully, out of math.
Okay, take care. Double.
Thank you.